Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. All the characters in the story are over 18 years old. When I, Lucas Simon, lost Sarah, with whom we had lived together for 5 years, in a plane crash, I barely had the strength to move on. Although my mother and sister were great helpers, my longtime friend Jeff Phillips helped me the most. Jeff had a pleasant sense of empathy, was always optimistic and encouraging, and involved me in many activities with other male friends, and sometimes with his wife Rosalind and other married couples. Sarah's death insurance allowed me to hire some good people to run my PR firm until I get my head out of my ass. A year after my wife's death, I felt almost human again, and although I had no desire to start dating, everything else in my life began to fall into place. In fact, I was lucky. I received a new large order for my PR firm, and at the age of 28 had more income than I had ever had in my life, and I could not even optimistically assume. While my life had changed as much as could be expected, Jeff continued to suffer from a problem he had had almost since I met him: bitchiness. What is bitchiness, you ask? In Jeff's case, it was a marriage to the infernal fool, the aforementioned Rosalind. Usually, but certainly not always, Rosalind was polite to Jeff when she was in the company of other people, but when alone with him she was an overbearing, uncouth, cruel fool who used Jeff as her emotional punching bag. Because of Jeff's kind and empathetic behavior, he agreed to this. I and some of Jeff's other friends were sure that she would ultimately be responsible for his demise, as he was showing more and more signs of stress, and despite the fact that he was only 29 years old, the doctor prescribed blood pressure medication for him. After consulting with some of our mutual friends, including a doctor, a lawyer, and an accountant, I arranged a personal meeting with Jeff when we went fishing on Saturday morning, despite the objections of the ogre, which I managed to cope with, because for some reason she treated me more like an annoying nuisance, which is just as shitty as she treated Jeff and most of our male friends. Since I'm not very sophisticated, I asked Jeff head-on after his first throw. Jeff, I noticed that you are very tense and don't seem to enjoy life as much as you should. Is it because of how Rosalind treats you? He replied with the air of a pet dog. Is that obvious, Lucas? I'm afraid so, buddy. I can't understand why you're staying with her. After a long sigh, he looked into my eyes and said, "You're a good friend, Lucas. Can I tell you something in confidence so that it won't be passed on to anyone without my permission?" I looked him straight in the eye, made him look up from his float in the stream, looked me straight in the eye and said, "I promise you straight out, buddy." After another deep sigh, almost bursting into tears, he replied, "We have a prenuptial agreement with her. I was very stupid when I signed it, but if I file for divorce or leave her for any reason other than infidelity on her part, all our property will be divided 50-50, including my business. If she gets at least half of the control over my business, or I have to buy out her share and she will take revenge on me for this, I am sure that I will be on the verge of bankruptcy, and all the hard work that I have put into this business over the past 8 years will be wasted." I thought about it a bit. "Could you give me a copy of the prenuptial agreement? I'll edit the names and ask my lawyer to review them. I want to make sure that I understand all the details before I give you advice on what I suggest you do." "Good," he said, even smiling a little. "By the way," I asked, casting the rod, "one more question. Since we're only talking about sports and trout, why did you marry her in the first place?" Jeff's smile widened. "She wasn't always like this, although I had some hints that she might be a bitch. However, during the wedding, I was thinking of my friend. At the beginning of our relationship, and now once every 2 weeks, when she's not a demon, she's like a $10,000 a night call girl," he said, moving his eyebrows up and down. "I'm sorry I asked." I chuckled. Then we started discussing issues with the quarterback of the local college football team. There are people who believe that the more beautiful a woman is, the more spoiled and difficult she is. To prove their case, these people could use Rosalind as proof, because despite her pathetic personality and character, she is hotter than a forest fire. On our way back from fishing, we stopped by Jeff's office, and he gave me a copy of his prenuptial agreement, from which I deleted all personal data in his presence. On Monday, I took it to my lawyer. It took her only 15 minutes to familiarize herself with it before she described the main points to me exactly as Jeff did. I thanked her, invited her to lunch as payment, and then called Jeff and reported the results. At the end of our conversation, I said, Jeff, I'm going to help you the same way you helped me and get your ass out of your situation. It's going to take some unusual events, and some of the things I'm going to tell you in front of Rosalind won't make sense. Trust me. Jeff even chuckled. I trust you, man. Don't tell me any details. Ignorance is bliss. Then it was my turn to giggle. I recruited our mutual friends without telling them what was on my mind. All I need from you guys is a little patience. If I act a little weird, maybe I'll lie a couple of times. And if I need money, some donations. They all loved Jeff and were in solidarity. The first part of my plan was to ingratiate myself with Rosalind, as far as her fickle nature would allow me. To do this, I had to pretend that she was Jeff's full partner, helping me get through my wife's death, although this was definitely not the case. However, she would have swallowed it because she already had an overestimated idea of her usefulness. First of all, I bought a beautiful floral arrangement, which included tulips, carnations, and roses, about which I have heard positive reviews from Rosalind over the years. When I found out that she was at home and Jeff wasn't, I brought everything I needed to her house and rang the doorbell. Lucas, it's a surprise to see you, she said in a tone that she thought was pleasant. Hi, Rosalind. I brought these flowers for you. I smiled. What? Oh, let me explain. Although I would certainly be happy to give you flowers at any time, I think Jeff would get jealous, so I didn't buy them. There was a lunch in my company today, and it was a flower arrangement that the supplier put on the main table. I thought they would disappear at my house, but since you helped me so much in a difficult moment, and I know that you love flowers, I said to myself, you have to give them to Rosalind, and here I am. I lied. Oh, they're beautiful, she exclaimed. Come in, Lucas. For the next 20 minutes, she oohed and awed. It really was an artistic composition, while we sipped wine. In all the time I've known her, I've never seen her smile for so long. Finally, when I said goodbye, she really hugged me. It went very well, I said to myself as I headed for my car. I congratulated myself on a successful first start until I felt an unpleasant feeling in my groin. I'm glad. This did not please me, and my mood quickly deteriorated, which caused my boner to calm down instantly. The next opportunity to win Rosalind over came when I happened to be at a place where she often went to lunch, usually alone, since she had few friends at work. It was a coffee shop where you ordered at the counter, and then you could sit down, and your order was brought to you. I waited for her to come up before going into the coffee shop so that I would be there when she came in. I waited for her to enter before getting in line so that she was right behind me. I was standing in line, looking ahead, feeling her behind me. I turned my head to the side and she elbowed me. Lucas, what are you doing here? She asked in a non-confrontational tone. Rosalind, wow, what a pleasant surprise. I was visiting a client, got hungry, saw this coffee shop and decided to try it. I bought her lunch. We sat down at the same table and had a pleasant chat about her work, about my fictional client, and about the reason for my stay in this particular coffee shop. She even smiled when I offered to escort her back to the office. In case one of the many guys who see you gets lusty and attacks you, I grinned. This statement clearly pleased her, although she replied something like, you must be blind. But she walked next to me and even took my hand as we crossed the street. When we reached her office, she smiled at me and hugged me goodbye once more. I waved and walked in the opposite direction to my car. Another good contact. I chuckled to myself. Then I felt discomfort in my groin again and felt disgusted with my temporarily stretched trousers. The third meeting took place on Saturday afternoon when I sent Jeff out to play golf, despite Rosalind's displeasure. Rosalind loved theatrical productions, but apparently rarely went to them. I bought 2 tickets to a matinee performance of Tennessee Williams' play The Glass Menagerie. The play was performed in our city version of the Off-Broadway theater. When I went to his house 90 minutes before the start of the performance, Rosalind was surprised to see me. Hi, Lucas. What brings you here? I just came to pick up Jeff. Didn't he tell you we were going to the Glass Menagerie matinee? What? She practically screamed. He plays golf. He didn't tell me anything about it. She began to breathe rapidly. I calmed her down and then pretended to call Jeff on his cell phone. In my fake conversation, I chuckled when I heard him say that he thought it would happen next week. I reported this misunderstanding to Rosalind, and she was obviously even more angry. After a few more soothing words on my part, I casually said, well, I guess I won't be able to see it after all, because I hate going there alone. Then, as I turned to leave, I pretended to have an idea and turned to face her. Uh, Rosalind, I really want to go. I know it's a big inconvenience, but maybe you can take the time to come with me? Her cold look at first made me think she was going to throw mud at me, but to my surprise, she said, "You can be sure I would. That asshole Jeff never takes me to the plays. What time does it all start?" I looked at my watch. In 85 minutes. I came in early so we could have a beer. "Give me 10 minutes, she snapped. "Do you mind if I call Jeff back and ask if I can take you to the theater?" "You can if you want, but on condition that you agree that no matter what he says, I'll go with you. Now get your ass over here, sit and wait for me, and don't even think about leaving me," she growled. I pretended to call Jeff as she was rushing up the stairs. Pretended that Jeff said everything was fine and let her go to the play, huh? 10 minutes later, Rosalind reappeared. Despite her casual clothes, she looked like $1,000,000. Instead of going in for a beer, we went in for a glass of wine and took our seats, the best in the room, since the producer was my client, 5 minutes before the curtain went up. To say that Rosalind liked it would be an understatement. Most of the time, she was literally beaming, except for the tears in her eyes. In this film adaptation, there was a happy ending where Laura really gets married, and Rosalind sheds tears of joy and is embarrassed that there are still tears in her eyes after the curtain was announced. We had another glass of wine and discussed the play. Rosalind was more lively and cheerful than I've ever seen her. The only temporary disappointment was that I asked, "Maybe I should call Jeff and find out when he needs you at home." "No, damn it," she snapped. "I'll decide when I get back." We talked for a good hour, sipping wine, before I drove her home. On the way back, she must have thanked me a dozen times, to which I always replied, "I'm so grateful that you agreed to go. I would really hate to miss this." When we arrived at her house, before she got out of the car, refusing my request to go around and open the door for her, she thanked me again and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek before getting out. I shouldn't have watched her ample waist glide up the steps of her house. This, as well as her kiss, made the vile pants stretch again. My attempts to ingratiate myself with Rosalind and gain her trust were crowned with the success I could have hoped for. I have been in touch with Jeff both personally and by phone, no messages or emails so that there is no electronic trace. Jeff suggested that Rosalind do the same thing I did, but she rejected him. Jeff said with a puzzled expression, "She says I should be more like you, but then rejects me when I try to do it. Everything will be decided soon," I smiled. "I think she trusts me now, so I hope to get the videos and photos you need next Thursday night when you're out of town." I smiled, then warned, "But I'm not going to go into details so that you have a believable mood." My plan for Thursday, when Jeff was out of town, was to ask Rosalind to help me hold a small event for clients. I was going to put some ecstasy in her drinks and ask a handsome male escort, whom I paid in cash, to take her to a hotel room rented under an assumed name and equipped with cameras to record them. I picked Rosalind up for my event around 5:30 p.m. This time, dressed up, she looked like $1,000,000. The male escort and all the other men at the event drooled at the sight of her. Around 7 p.m., I slipped some ecstasy into her drink. After I saw her take a few sips, and when she smiled at me sincerely, I was overcome by a sudden feeling of guilt mixed with emotions that I did not understand. Then I decided that I wasn't going to follow through with my plan. I immediately found the man from the escort and told him to leave, as I had already paid him. He looked disappointed, but I didn't care. Then I went to throw out the rest of Rosalind's drink and take her home. However, ecstasy did not have its usual effect. When I went up to her to pick up the drink, she began to speak indistinctly and suddenly lost consciousness. Fortunately, I caught her before she hit her head on the floor. I immediately took Rosalind to the emergency room. I took out her insurance information from her wallet, lied that I was her brother, and they took her for an examination. I refrained from calling Jeff until I got in touch with the doctor. 3 hours later, the doctor came to me and told me what had happened. "This is an extremely unusual situation," Dr. Ross said thoughtfully. "It looks like your sister took ecstasy. However, it didn't affect her the way it did ordinary people. It usually reduces cerebral blood flow in the motor and somatosensory cortex, amygdala, cingulate cortex, insula, and thalamus, while producing high levels of serotonin. However, In your sister, it affected a previously unrecognized brain tumor, which caused her to lose consciousness. I didn't understand much of what he said, but I pretended to understand. Then I asked, has she been operated on? She had a brain tumor. We have successfully and completely removed the benign tumor. It's amazing that she was able to function normally before that. I was amazed. What would be the normal consequences of her tumor? I asked. There may be a lot of them, but one thing is for sure. It's almost constant irritability and possibly a short temper as a result, Dr. Ross continued. Can this cause a bitchy and unpleasant character? I asked. Not the words I would use, but generally yes, he replied. How long will she have to stay in the hospital, and how long will she recover after surgery? She should probably stay here for 2 or 3 more days, and once she gets the anesthetic out of her system and recovers from the trauma caused by the surgery, she will be better than ever, probably 4 to 5 days after discharge, he replied. Our conversation continued for another 5 minutes, after which I was able to visit Rosalind about an hour after she regained consciousness and was already in her room. Before I went into her room, I called Jeff, but the message went to voicemail. I left a brief message, but it contained all the necessary medical information. I was shocked by the effect my visit to Rosalind had on me. She looked tired, but, in fact, she was no different, except for the shaved part of her head. I felt a mixture of guilt, relief, joy, and I damn well couldn't believe it, tingling feeling that I hadn't felt in a long time, and that was difficult to diagnose. She had a big smile on her face. When I sat down next to her and took her hand, her smile widened, and before I could speak, she said, I remember when you took me to the hospital. You were so warm and kind. You are my savior. I tried to object, but she put her finger to my lips and said, don't try to deny it. Somehow, my surgery has freed me in a way that I can already clearly feel, and I want you to know that I cherish our relationship that has developed over the past few months. Will you kiss me? You are welcome. I was amazed that, without thinking, I bent down and quickly kissed her on the lips. I stayed by her side for about an hour before the nurses kicked me out and told me I could come back at 9 o'clock the next morning. When I came out of the hospital, my head was in a complete mess, and I slept very poorly that night, trying to cope with all the conflicting emotions that plagued my brain. The next morning, Jeff and I entered Rosalind's room at about the same time. The relationship between the three of us was a bit strained, as Rosalind treated me as her husband and Jeff as an acquaintance. When we were escorted out, we were both confused. After our visit, I told Jeff that the doctor had told me about a benign brain tumor. You should consult Dr. Ross personally, but that might mean she's not so bitchy anymore. It doesn't matter. Too much water has flowed, he replied. I was always nervous around her. Did you manage to get the photos? No, she fainted, I told him, deciding to keep my refusal of an escort to myself and try to fix what I had done. Rosalind and I talked on the phone every day for the next 10 days. Sometimes I called her, sometimes she called me. All the conversations were optimistic. I've also been talking to Jeff for most of these days. Jeff said Rosalind was definitely not bitchy anymore, but she didn't seem to care if he was around or not. On the 16th day after her trip to the emergency room, on Saturday, around 10 a.m., there was a knock on my door. I opened it and saw Rosalind, dressed in a yellow sundress with a pattern, with a big smile on her face. Hello, Lucas, she intoned. Hi, Rosalind, it's good to see you. Do you want to come in? Thank you, she said as I escorted her into my living room. She sat in an armchair for two, and I sat on the largest sofa. To what do I owe the honor of your presence? I chuckled. Well, I wanted to tell you about my successes and then ask you something, she replied with a smile. Refusing the drink, she spoke slowly and cheerfully for the next 10 minutes, describing how her life had changed for the better after the removal of a brain tumor. Life would be perfect if I wasn't married to Jeff, she continued, frowning slightly. Why do you say that? I asked. Jeff is indifferent and has been for the last few years, at least in relation to me. Besides, I fell in love with another person. I instinctively raised my eyebrows. I didn't want to ask who, but curiosity got the better of me, and I asked anyway. A devilish grin appeared on Rosalind's face. She stood up, took off her sundress, the only piece of clothing she was wearing, except for 3-inch heels, came over to me and sat on my lap. Stroking my face, she said, "Why are you so stupid?" My mind couldn't handle the situation because it hurt like hell as it swelled up so fast. But, I stuttered, until she put an end to my torment with a passionate kiss on the lips. When she took a deep breath, she continued, "My question is, do I have a chance of a relationship with you? There are probably men somewhere who could resist Rosalind in such circumstances. However, considering that I hadn't had more than a year, that any sighted guy would rate her at least 9.9 on a 10-point scale, and that I suddenly realized that even before her surgery I had feelings for her, I wasn't that kind of man. I wasn't even thinking about my dear sensitive friend Jeff when I kissed her with the passion of a love song. Soon after I pressed my lips to hers, we made love. I really have no idea how long it took before we both physically relaxed and became fully aware of what was happening. I suspected that we were back among the living when she kissed me gently on the tip of my nose, and her smile became as wide as Mississippi. "It was fun," she giggled. I'd never heard her giggle before. "Besides, does that mean you're considering a relationship with me?" I thought for a long time, until her smile faded a little. Then I told the truth. "I have very contradictory feelings. I suddenly realized that maybe I'm already in love with you, and if I'm not, then I'm close to it." I began to speak. Her smile, which was getting wider, made me stop. I stroked her cheek and then said, "But I can't stab Jeff in the back, and there's another thing you don't know about that might make you give up on a relationship with me." A puzzled expression appeared on Rosalind's face, and she said, "Let's take a shower together, change clothes, and then discuss this, even if it takes all day and all night." I agreed, and we got our asses out of bed, and I turned on the shower to make sure it was warm enough for her before getting into it. It was then that I took a long and leisurely look at her amazing body. She noticed that I was looking at her and asked rhetorically, "Do you like what you see?" "You look too gorgeous to even try to put it into words," I managed, prompting Rosalind's malicious grin. "I've never done 3 times in 90 minutes in my life, which is exactly how long, according to my calculations, it's been since Rosalind took off her sundress. Seeing her gorgeous body in the shower and rubbing it changed that. Before the water had time to cool down, I entered her from behind and clung to her as if my life depended on it, and we experienced mutual moments again, so strong that it was a miracle that we did not faint right in the shower. We finally washed up before the water got so cold that we started to freeze, and dried ourselves with towels. She insisted that I give her one of my oversized t-shirts. My height is 190 centimeters and hers is 165 centimeters, and I just put on sports shorts. I made us sandwiches in my kitchen, and we ate them, washed down with cold tea and chatting amiably. When we were done, she asked, "Where can we talk? What about the crime scene?" I grinned, pointing to the living room. She grinned back, and we went in and sat next to each other on the big couch after I threw off my scattered clothes. I held Rosalind's hands and looked into her eyes. "Before I say anything else, I want you to fully grasp the following facts, as they all contribute to where we are right now. 1. You used to be a real bitch, especially towards Jeff." She nodded in agreement with this statement before I continued. "No one knew it was because of a brain tumor, but that was the reality of the situation. 2. You are more beautiful than any woman in the world." She blushed and sighed modestly. "No, I'm not." But I interrupted her, gently putting my finger to her lips. 3. Jeff, along with my mother and sister, saved me after Sarah's death. I would never have gone through this without him. 4. Jeff really wanted to divorce you because of the way you treated him, but given your prenuptial agreement, under which you received half of his business, unless you cheated on him, he couldn't afford it," I said. "Do you know about the prenuptial agreement?" "What is it?" she asked. "Yes, I read it and talked about it with Jeff." She nodded her head. 5. I was willing to do anything to help Jeff, as he helped me when I needed it most. 6. As part of my plan to help Jeff, by the way, he didn't know any details of my plan, only that I was going to help him, I started courting you. It made her eyebrows rise. I squeezed her hand. Before moving on to the really difficult part, number 7, I must clarify that although at first I tried only to please you in order to win you over, I began to have feelings for you, despite your bitchiness. And today, after the best act of my life, After your surgery and the tenderness that accompanied this act, I know that I fell in love with you. Can you believe that? Do you feel it? She smiled again. Yes, I can believe it, because I felt how it overlapped with the gymnastics we had just been doing. Okay, now the most difficult part. I really don't want this to ruin our relationship in the future, whatever it is. But I have to be honest, if we want to have any kind of relationship at all, even if it turns into a one-day affair and then you hate me. Rosalind had a puzzled expression on her face as I sighed and continued. Then I told her about how I hired a male escort, slipped it into her drink, equipped a hotel room with cameras, and then changed my mind, fired the escort, and tried to throw her drink away when she fainted due to the effect of ecstasy combined with a tumor. When I finished, Rosalind stared at me in silence for an excruciatingly long time. Finally, she said, "Well, I guess now that you've fucked me, you can tell Jeff to get a divorce." No, I barked, louder and sharper than I had intended. Now you're a different person. I already started looking at you differently before your surgery, and now that I know that I love you. If you don't leave me, I'm going to settle everything between you, Jeff, and me. If you leave me, Jeff will never know from me what happened between us today. A few minutes later, when she was looking at me in silence, she said, "I have a lot to think about. I'll call you as soon as I come to some kind of preliminary conclusion." Rosalind took off her oversized t-shirt, of course, flaunting her gorgeous naked body again, put on a sundress and headed for the door. I gently grabbed her hand. "I love you," I whispered. She gave me a small smile, gave me a quick kiss on the tip of my nose, and walked out the door. Despite the best act of my life, which ended just over an hour ago, I felt like shit. My betrayal of Jeff, Rosalind's near betrayal, and my weakness. I told her 3 times that I loved her, even though I only realized it now all weighed heavily on me. I was more or less like a zombie for the rest of the weekend, but I managed to get my head out of my ass long enough to start making a plan in case Rosalind did contact me in the future. On Monday morning, I delivered 2 dozen roses to Rosalind at her office. There was no message, only the imprint of a kiss on the postcard that came with the flowers. I was worried for the next few days, as I hadn't heard from either Rosalind or Jeff, but I was busy at work, and in my spare time I worked out my plan. On Thursday evening, after work, Rosalind showed up at my house again. "Thanks for the flowers," she said with a barely perceptible smile. "I'm glad you like them," I replied, walking out the door and motioning for her to enter. We were sitting next to each other on the couch in my living room. She didn't take her hands away when I took them. "If you have a plan, I want to hear it," she said firmly. I shrugged my shoulders and then replied, "I'll go to Jeff and tell him that maybe I can persuade the new you to divorce, in which you will divide the assets 50-50, except that you will leave his business alone, although you will receive payments of 2% of its value every year for the next 10 years. If he agrees, the 3 of us talk. At this time, you tell him that you have fallen in love with me and want to start a romantic relationship with me." I pretend to be surprised, but I show that I agree, if it doesn't bother Jeff. If he doesn't mind, we could date for a couple of months, and then you could move in with me. You and I will sign a prenuptial agreement that will protect both of us, but will be more generous to you than the deal you will make with Jeff. Again, Rosalind stared at me in silence for a very long time. It was becoming her trademark. After a while, she said, "Actually, it's a good plan, but I need confirmation that my last time with you wasn't an accident. Jeff is out of town today, so after you cook dinner for me and we digest our dishes, we need to get back to your bedroom before tomorrow morning." When I woke up on Friday morning, completely drained emotionally and physically, and Rosalind was caressing me, trying to do the impossible and wake me up for the 4th time since 9 o'clock the previous evening, I wondered if I could survive a relationship with her. When I felt ready, I was really shocked that my plan worked perfectly. You could usually expect at least a small glitch. Jeff basically agreed with my divorce plan, although I started with 3% per annum for 15 years, but he lowered it to 2% within 10 years, which Rosalind and I achieved anyway. The next meeting with the 3 of us was warm, and I thought it was appropriate to feign surprise when Rosalind showed romantic interest in me. The divorce that followed was perhaps the most peaceful in history because the only serious financial issue had been resolved, and neither Jeff nor Rosalind were interested in continuing a relationship with each other. As soon as the terms of the divorce were agreed and the paperwork was filed, I invited Jeff to dinner. "Jeff, there's something really bothering me," and I have to admit it," I said as soon as our steak and lobster dishes arrived, which he liked so much that he didn't give up on me, despite what I wanted to say. "What happened?" He smiled before cutting off a piece of sirloin and dipping it in melted butter, presumably for lobster. However, before I could muster up the courage to answer, he expressed something like a smirk, although I couldn't tell for sure, because soon he was already chewing meat. "You're not going to bore me with the story that you were with Rosalind before you started negotiating the divorce, are you?" When my fork with the lobster tail froze in the air, I almost choked. "Did you know?" I finally blurted out. "How?" When he finished chewing and swallowing, he smiled and said, "You don't think I could have missed the way Rosalind was looking at you, and the fact that you looked happy for the first time since Sarah died, do you? You must have made love," he concluded with a chuckle. But, you could have walked away without paying anything from your business," I swallowed. "Yes, by embarrassing you by having to testify and possibly ruining your newfound happiness when I've been working for a year to get you back on your feet. Your suggestion was eminently reasonable, because Rosalind and I really had a few good years, and after her surgery, my health improved quickly enough that I stopped taking blood pressure medication. So I was happy as a pig that I let you take her away," he replied before cutting off another piece of steak and dip it in melted butter. There were tears in my eyes, and I said, "You are the best friend in the world," but he cut me off just before the world. "Don't be offended by me, dude. Enough of this. Just name your firstborn after me. When will our local jerks finally hire a quarterback who is worth something?" Rosalind and I didn't have a period of pretend dates. She moved in with me as soon as the divorce papers were filed. There was a clause in the divorce papers specifically authorizing this. Fortunately, she never tortured me to death, although it wasn't for lack of trying on her part during the first 4 months of our relationship. Even after 4 months, I easily came to the conclusion that I had to propose to the hottest woman I had ever seen, who now, without tumors, was as pleasant as she was beautiful when my schedule was accelerated. After a wonderful lovemaking, she found herself nose to nose with me. "There's something I haven't told you the truth about," she said with a serious expression on her face. Actually, I wasn't lying. I was just misinformed about the facts. All sorts of disgusting options flashed through my mind. What is it, dear?" "I told you that I can't have children. Since I'm 6 weeks pregnant, it doesn't seem right." "What are you doing?" I asked, clearly excited, not upset. "You'll be a proud dad." "It can't be helped, stud," she chuckled. "Will you marry me?" I blurted out, simultaneously jumping out of bed, running to the dresser, and opening the top drawer. I dropped the box twice before I finally got to it and opened it, revealing a diamond engagement ring that had more carats in it than Bugs Bunny. She said with a thoughtful expression on her face. "Let's see. I'm in love. I'm doing it better than I have any right to expect. And in a few months, I'm going to have a baby with you. Let me think about it." I tickled her until she screamed, "Okay, yes, I will marry you. And now stop this tickling torture and make love to the expectant mother." I did. We didn't name our firstborn after Jeff. We couldn't think of a single decent name for the girl that would be at least somewhat similar to Jeff. However, our son's name is Jeff Simon, and his godfather Jeff Phillips is proud of him. He has already won a place on the school football team, despite the fact that he is only 2 years old now. Jeff, his new wife Brittany, and their daughter, her name is not Rosalind, ha ha ha, are frequent visitors to our house. I couldn't have been happier during the last 6 years of marriage with my wife, beautiful devil Rosalind, who didn't have tumors. Life is a strange thing. End.